Next, from Chicago, the Illinois Policy Institute presents details of its plan that the Institute believes can balance Illinois' budget without raising taxes. We'll hear from members of the Institute, as well as Republican State Representatives Jeanne Ives and Allen Skillicorn. This runs about 40 minutes.
Good morning, and thanks for coming out today. My name's John Tillman. I'm the CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute, and we're very excited to be with you today to talk about Budget Solutions 2018. I would like to thank Representatives Jeanne Ives and Allen Skillicorn for being here with us as well today. They'll be up here in a moment to speak to you as well. As you know, Illinois has not had a state budget in over 18 months, has not had a balanced budget in over 15 years. And it is true that our state is tottering on the brink of insolvency. Some would say it already is insolvent. So we're here today to present our reform plan, as I noted, Budget Solutions 2018. The Illinois Policy Institute has crafted a budget plan that will actually fix our state. Our plan is balanced and does not raise taxes. It offers property tax relief to Illinois taxpayers. And most importantly, it reforms spending. And it reforms pensions in a way that complies with the Illinois Constitution as it currently is written. Our plan, unlike every other plan being discussed in the state, ensures that taxpayers are respected and treated fairly instead of being treated like an ATM machine to pay for the past mistakes of elected officials. In a little bit, I'm going to offer an overview of our plan and why it works. But before I do that, let's all just maybe reminisce for a brief moment. Reminiscing can be kind of fun. Let's go back to 2011, a time when Illinois was in turmoil. Then it had a growing backlog of bills. It had a structural deficit in 2011. Illinois, you might remember, had a pension problem, a very weak economy. The unemployment rate was over 9%. Things were pretty bad. So what did the General Assembly do in all of its wisdom? In January of 2011, the lawmakers raised the personal income tax and the corporate income tax, a $7 billion tax increase. We were told this tax increase would be temporary. Former Governor Pat Quinn said the tax increase would, quote, make sure our state has a strong economy, close quote. Senate President Cullerton, who still serves today, said the tax increase would allow Illinois to, quote, pay off its debt, and promised that it would lead to spending reform. In fact, he said, and I quote, it's going to work. So what has happened? From the time that tax increase was enacted in 2011 until the partial expiration of it at the end of 2014, Illinois government collected $31 billion additional dollars from the people of Illinois. $31 billion additional dollars. Every single household in Illinois did its part to try to solve the problem. It sent thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars to state government as part of their effort to solve the problem and turn the state around. Did the tax increase do any of the things that the politicians promised? Did it erase the backlog of bills? Did it repair the Illinois economy? Did it repair the structural deficit? As you well know, because we're standing here today, it did none of those things. In fact, we would make the case it made things worse. Illinois was thrust into an even deeper economic hole. Hundreds of thousands of people have moved out of Illinois, about 114,000 last year alone, and businesses have left and continue to leave. The state's backlog of bills has lingered, and Illinois' pension debt grew by more than $20 billion during the tax hike years alone. In 2011, lawmakers raised taxes, but they did not address spending reforms. They forced taxpayers to send more money to Springfield, but they did not change their own ways, their own behavior. And that's why we are here today facing the same problems we did 6 years ago. So why would Illinois ever think about raising taxes again at a time when after it's been a failed policy for so long? Every week, another lawmaker, another pundit, another special interest group says to the General Assembly, raise taxes. We keep hearing that there's no way to fix Illinois without taking billions of dollars away from taxpayers all over again. And I'm here to tell you they are wrong. Raising taxes will not fix Illinois. We must reform the way Illinois does business. We must reform the way it actually spends the taxpayers' money. We must slow the growth of spending to a rate below the growth in revenues. It is that simple. Spending must rise more slowly than revenues. That is the only solution. So we're here today to offer up a new path forward, one that will actually fix Illinois and get us out of these problems once and for all. And as I said earlier, I'm so happy to have Representative Ives and Skillicorn with us, who have been courageous leaders for fiscal reform in Springfield. And as I said, our solution is called Budget Solutions 2018. Our plan offers a full-year budget without gimmicks. Our budget plan is balanced. We do not spend more money than Illinois will take in under the current tax rates. That's right. I know it's a little crazy given what's going on in Springfield, but we don't propose any income tax increases at all. Our plan does close the $7.1 billion budget deficit in a responsible fashion. We've been touring the state, talking to taxpayers, local municipal officials, and others about our plan, and perhaps the thing they're most excited about is the property tax plan, the property tax relief that we suggest. Illinois has the highest property taxes in the nation. For a lot of homeowners, their property tax bill is like a second mortgage. In suburban Lake County, your typical household's property tax burden has risen by 44% since 1999. In McHenry County, that's 45% rising since 2000. And even though the state government doesn't levy a property tax directly, it plays a major role in driving up the costs of local government. So our plan fixes that. We propose a 5-year freeze on property tax levies to give taxpayers immediate relief. After the initial 5-year period, we propose tying any annual property tax increases to the ability of Illinois citizens to pay. That means basing any growth on the annual change in Illinois' median household income with a maximum growth of 2%. Our plan requires a referendum approved by 2/3 of voters whenever local governments want to raise other taxes and fees so they can't bypass that limit. The Illinois government encourages local governments to spend more than they should by sending billions of dollars to thousands of local governments a year. All this does is allow local governments to spend on things that their constituencies would never approve of and pass those bills on to taxpayers all across the state outside of their community. We want to end that charade. We want to create local accountability. If a local school district wants to engage in pension spiking at the end of a teacher's career, they can do that. If they want to give administrators excessive compensation packages, they can do that, but they won't be able to spend the bill to other taxpayers anymore. They'll have to convince their local taxpayers why that spending is that kind of money is a good thing. We also recognize that Illinois makes it tough for local governments to do the right thing. It's very hard to reform local government because of state mandates and other regulatory issues. It's hard to consolidate governments agency to agency. And too often the state imposes excessive costs, especially unnecessary mandates on local government. We roll these back. We eliminate them. Local control will finally mean local control. Now, another facet of our plan that you're all quite familiar with as a problem in Illinois is pensions, and we have an excellent pension proposal that actually solves that problem as well. It does seem a little bit like, since the 2015 Supreme Court decision, that most of the people serving in the General Assembly and around the state have been paralyzed in terms of how to address the pension problem. It has been getting worse ever since the pension crisis started, but especially since 2015. But let's go back to 2011. Illinois had an unfunded pension liability of $83 billion. Today, that number stands at $130 billion. Think about that. Almost every single penny of the $31 billion in tax hikes that were taken in from 2011 through the end of 2014 went to pay for pensions. And despite that, we still have an increase of $47 billion from 83 to $130 billion. That is amazing. Illinois' pension system is broken. It will never work. It's unfair to ask taxpayers to keep bailing out a broken system, and it's also unfair, very unfair, to government workers to make promises that will never be able to be kept. We cannot keep making those promises. Our plan ends that and ends this crisis. Not as quickly as we'd like, because we do have to have a constitutional solution, but absent changes to the Constitution, we've devised a plan that does actually secure Illinois' pension system. Our pension proposal does 3 critical things. Number 1, it opens up the state's existing self-managed plan to all government workers. Number 2, it moves all government workers to self-managed plans and achieves 90% funding by 2047. And number 3, it frees up state money that currently goes to pensions for other priorities such as social services and education. A little more detail, some of you may be familiar with this. So 20,000 employees of the state government have decided not to join the current system that is broken, and instead they participate in this self-managed plan. That plan is only open to higher education employees. What we do is open it up to all state government and local employees. Under the Institute's plan, at least half of all workers will be on a defined contribution plan by 2030, and almost all workers will have control of their destiny, be on a self-managed plan by 2047. This proposal follows the lead of more than a dozen states that have enacted some sort of 401k style reform over the last 20 years. The final reform idea mentioned just here in my opening remarks is relating to the state's workforce. The governor has agreed to collective bargaining contracts with 20 unions, as you know. But there's one holdout. Everybody knows who that holdout is, right? AFSCME, and it is a biggie. As we speak, AFSCME is the state's largest union and is conducting a strike authorization vote. The union wants more money. The union wants higher raises. They want even better health care with even better subsidies. The union leadership, frankly, needs a reality check. Illinois is broke, and AFSCME workers already get an unbelievably extraordinary deal. AFSCME demands ignores 4 significant facts about Illinois state worker compensation. First, Illinois state workers are the highest paid state workers in the country. AFSCME workers receive Cadillac health care benefits, and they only pay 23% of the premium. Most state workers receive free retiree health care after they retire, health insurance, I should say. And career state retirees, on average, receive about $1.6 million in pension benefits on top of Social Security. AFSCME workers represent just 1% of our state's population, but they're asking the other 99% who make less, who have lesser benefits, to give them more. That's just not fair, and there's no way that should happen. Our proposal saves $1.1 billion in a single year by beginning to achieve parity, fairness, between those who work for government and those who pay for government. Illinois could save $63 million, for example, by paying overtime after 40 hours instead of 37.5 hours. We could save another $48 million by adjusting how holiday pay is computed. Total payroll for state employees will cost about $4.5 billion in 2018. Our plan calls for reforming the cost of government by reducing payroll costs by about $500 million. That's a little over 10%. That seems to me very reasonable. That's what people do in the private sector every day. And we ask rank and file workers, in fact, we implore them not to strike, and to accept the governor's last best offer that's on the table instead. It's in line with the 20 other government unions in Illinois and is closer to being in line with what taxpayers can afford. Now, some of you may be thinking, how can the legislature pass such a budget, such a bold, reform, balanced budget, or even an irresponsible tax increase? How can they do these reforms? I think they have no choice to do this. They have to do this instead of irresponsible tax increases. Illinois is in extreme crisis. Our state is at risk of financial and an economic death spiral. Some say it's already begun. We have been standing up here doing these proposals for years, warning you of these problems for years, and we are running out of time to fix them. To tell you about the reality of these discussions in the General Assembly, first up will be Representative Jeanne Ives, followed by Representative Allen Skillicorn. Jeanne?
Well, John, I'm not really going to talk about the reality in the General Assembly. I'm going to talk about the reality with my taxpayers that I represent in my area of Wheaton. And I will tell you, nearly every conversation at the door is, as soon as my kid's out of high school, I'm out of here. As soon as my wife retires from her job, I'm leaving the state of Illinois. I cannot afford these property taxes, and I'm not getting the benefits that I deserve out of those services. So my district is very much aware of where the state is headed. Unfortunately, the General Assembly is not. And I think what's important to realize here is that Illinois is an outlier. Our financial condition is what's extreme, not these policies we're trying to put in place. And we need to correct that. We need to stand with the common Illinoisans who do not receive nearly the credit that they should in any of the discussions down there when it comes to the budget. It is all about the lobbyists, the special interests, the public sector unions, and longtime political people who have made their mark down in Springfield and not made their mark in the private sector or with their taxpayers. This is enough. Now, what's also interesting about this proposal is that none of these ideas are really new. If you think that there's a lot of new ideas in this plan, you're wrong. Many of these proposals have already been written up in bill format years ago. In fact, the pension proposal that moves everybody to a Tier 3 SMP self-managed plan. I wrote that bill 2 years ago. Of course, it never got out of rules. The Medicaid reform has been talked about. The other pension ideas have been talked about. So none of this is really that new. And so for anybody to I want people to really understand that we're an outlier in terms of finances. We need to do something that's real, and taxpayers expect that response. So thank you to the Illinois Policy Institute for packaging this comprehensive yet modest reform package. And I say modest because they did not actually go as far as they could have. They didn't count on new revenue from gambling that is unknown. They didn't make rosy assumptions that can't be verified. Everything here has been very well thought out. And so I encourage you in the media to write about this and to make sure that people understand the plan in its entirety. And also here with me is Representative Allen Skillicorn.
Hi there, my name is Representative Allen Skillicorn, and I'm excited to be here because Illinois needs bold leadership and transformative policies. Now, I was reminded that brevity is a very important subject, so I just want to give you a rundown of what's my priorities in the general legislature and how I'm going to serve my constituents. And first is that working class families, small businesses, and retirees are being punished every single day from our out-of-control property taxes. In the Collier counties, we have some of the highest property taxes in the nation, 2 to 3 times higher than the national average. These people are not receiving the services they pay for. They're getting a very bum deal. They're not getting a very good return on their investment. Second is that the general legislature needs to make it easier for local municipalities to provide services that people want, but at a lower cost. Now, that could be through consolidation, that could be through unfunded mandate reform, that can be through other issues and other policies that make it easier to provide the services that people really want, but at a lower cost. And third, we need to retire and rein in our pension deficit. Right now, we have an out-of-control pension bubble. And this is a situation that is going to lead to future property tax increases, future income tax increases, and that's something we need to rein in. So I wholeheartedly support the pension reform policies that are in this program, and I think it's utmost that we get to it. So again, Illinois needs bold leadership and transformative policies. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. Why don't I invite our Vice President of Policy, Michael Lucci, to come and join me at the podium. He is well-versed on the details of the plan. I am versed on the details of the plan. Questions? Craig.
You propose ending the revenue sharing for local governments. You know that's been a sore point every time it's been brought up. And what the local governments say is that that's going to force them to raise property taxes, and it'll simply be them being blamed for it, as opposed to the state.
Right, and so a couple things on that. We've been proposing this for a number of years. It's been proposed by Democrats and Republicans alike in the General Assembly and discussed by former Governor Quinn as well. So this is not a new concept, but there's a very important point here. Number one is that we exempt communities below 5,000 population. This transfer from the state income tax back to local units of government has a larger impact on these very small communities, so we exempt them from that. For communities larger than that, this averages about 3 to 5% of their total revenue, so it is a very manageable part of their total spending. But the most important thing we do is our local property tax reform and our other local reforms that we've proposed. The offsets of those in terms of reducing mandates, eliminating things like prevailing wage, reforming collective bargaining, and giving local government control of collective bargaining, the savings of that far outweighs any of the cost of the elimination of the local government distributive fund. I think as soon as people begin to understand that this proposal actually gives them greater control over their spending and their budget, then they will embrace it. But it will take some time to teach them that because they've been well indoctrinated by the riff you started with.
John, I have some questions on your pension.
Sure, Greg.
I gather the gist of the savings would be from switching people from the current system into a 401k system?
Yes.
If people did not voluntarily abandon the guaranteed pension they have now to go to a 401k system, is not all the money you're talking about saving, $650 plus another $1 billion, isn't that a phantom
No, not at all. In fact, we were very careful to not do that. So the way the system is structured is all new employees would go into the self-managed plan, all new employees. That is perfectly constitutional, and the most important thing that does is stops accruing unfunded liabilities for the old system. The second thing we do is make it available to Tier 2 employees. As you know, Tier 2 employees are getting cheated right now. The Tier 2 system requires Tier 2 employees to put in 7%, or 9% rather, in a contribution, but they only get a 7% benefit. That 2% difference is subsidizing the Tier 1 employees. So we expect that virtually every single Tier 2 employee will voluntarily go into the new plan that we're talking about because it's more fair to them, more lucrative to them. And then the question is how many employees in the Tier 1 system would choose or opt into it. And our assumption that we build these models on is none. And we use the same actuarial scoring firm that does the state's work. Michael, do you want to add to that?
I think that that largely covers the point, and I think that another point that we would add is what we need to do is get off of this pension system where we're promising benefits, but we're not sure how they're going to get funded. We've seen how that's worked out just in 1 year. The unfunded liability went up $20 billion. That's essentially a $20 billion deficit in 1 year because we have no control over the unfunded liability because we keep pouring into that type of system.
I'm confused, guys. You've got an unfunded total liability of $130 billion.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to put less money into the system because the Tier 2 people who are now kind of filling that gap are going to go into a system where they have to put
No, that's not
aside.
that.
So how do you save?
That's
how do you pay off $130 billion in debt?
That's incorrect. So let me correct it for you. The plan requires the state to put in somewhere between $7 and $18 billion in additional investment in order to pay for this transition. But that creates certainty over time versus the uncertainty of continuing with the current plan. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So we just talked about in 2011, the unfunded liability was $87 billion or $83 billion, and now it's $130 billion, a $47 billion increase. That creates uncertainty. You never know how much more is going to keep growing and growing and growing out of control, despite the fact we've made full pension payments during that entire time. What we do is begin to work out and work down and shift over time employees out of that broken system and into a system that is clearly predictable. It will require
Go back there. You said you're going to jumpstart this with $7 to $18 billion
between now and 2047, and
Where
in
does
the
that money come from?
it comes out of the general revenue fund. But if you take a look at what if you have to actually look at the numbers, Greg, rather than just react to them. If you actually look at the lines and the ramp over time between now and 2047, it is very affordable over time. Actually, the way we've done it is we lower the cost initially to create some flexibility in the current budget, but over time that ramp is just slightly skewed, but it doesn't go past 2047, and by the time you get to 2047, it's 90% funded, and 100% of employees now, or nearly 100% of employees would be in the self-managed plan.
But I just want to be sure.
Representative Ives, can you give us a House Republican perspective on Leader Redonio's negotiations with with President Cullerton and the reported fact that she is negotiating a tax increase, an income tax increase? I mean, there's an active negotiation by one of the leaders in your party on a tax increase when you say here that it absolutely won't work.
Oh, I can tell you that the Senate grand bargain was not really discussed in any detail in our House Republican caucus meeting last week. So as a unit, we did not talk about it. I will tell you individual members are adamantly opposed to the Senate grand bargain. There's a number of problems. You've got 13 interlocking pieces of legislation, and there's a reason to hate a portion of it for nearly everybody. So we're not on board with this at all. And most of us think it's dead on arrival in the House anyway, from the Democrat standpoint.
And you know, I see other than property tax reform, I don't see any of the other structural reforms that the governor talks about. He's talked about for the last 2-3 years, really. I don't see very many of them up there. I mean, is this something that can be done without structural reform? And
Sure. So the included in here is estimated savings for workers' compensation. We've put out a report on that. We have another one coming out. The cost to taxpayers. We have a similar estimate for the changes on prevailing wage, and it's based off of census data, how much we spend on construction, how much of that is labor cost, so how much could you estimate savings. Those are pieces of it, but the large portion is to give local governments the power to set their wages and benefits at an affordable level for taxpayers.
So structural reforms are in here.
Yes, yes, yes.
John, can I ask you a question about big development today? Caterpillar's decided to move its global headquarters to Chicago from Peoria. Obviously, it's a blow to Peoria, but it's a very significant move for the city of Chicago. I just wonder what your thoughts are in terms of what this says about the vitality of the economy, and do you have any concerns about givebacks or sweeteners in order to accomplish this?
I've not heard whether there's any givebacks or sweeteners on this, and I think it's a wonderful thing for the people of Chicago to have Caterpillar come here, and for the people that will be working in Chicago for Caterpillar. I think it's a tragedy for Peoria and an end of an amazing era. But I think that we get so caught up, and this is part of the problem in this entire discussion. This is one of the things I was struck by last week when I was down for the governor's state of the state. I'm so struck by these sort of things. People get very caught up in the headquarters coming to Fulton Market and the West Loop and all the rest of it, now Caterpillar coming. These are wonderful things. We should all champion that. That's not the problem we have. The people who are well-educated, working for elite companies in elite positions are doing just fine. But if you go to the south side of Chicago, if you go to the west side of Chicago, if you go to South Cook County where people are paying 4 or 5, 6% of their home value in property taxes, who have property tax bills that are larger than their mortgage, and they have a mortgage they'll never get out from under because they can't sell their home because of declining values. This is what nobody in Springfield is talking about. It's great to talk about Caterpillar, but what about the people that can't afford their mortgage in South Cook? Detroit is unfolding right before our eyes in South Cook, south side of Chicago, and the west side of Chicago. And while we should all be happy about Caterpillar and all the other companies coming here, McDonald's and et cetera, that's fine. But we have a bifurcated system. It's good if you're well educated and well employed. It's terrible if you're struggling, middle class, or poor.
I have a question about that regarding health care for the poor, the Medicaid expansion. Your proposal, it looks like you're suggesting repealing this expansion that the state would have to pick up 5% of the expansion costs starting this year. As you know, Illinois is a state that sends more money to the federal government than it receives back in federal aid. So doesn't it seem foolish to save this 5% and give up that federal?
Well, that whole sort of equation is taking money from the federal government. It's like the first hit of heroin is free kind of thinking, right? The first, as time goes on, the state of Illinois is going to have to pick up a larger and larger portion of that Medicaid expansion.
It's not a hit of heroin; it's actually providing health care for people who need health care.
Well. Yes, let's not get overwrought about the metaphor. Okay, it's just an analogy, actually in this case. But the whole point here is Medicaid. Who should it help? It should help the poorest among us, the most vulnerable among us.
Define the poorest. Yeah.
Pardon me?
Define the poorest.
Come on up, Jeannie. The poorest, it depends which level you want to use, 1, 2, or 3 times eligibility for, or the poverty rate. But here's what that reform specifically does. 600,000 people were expanded into Medicaid as part of Obamacare who are able-bodied adults with no children. The question is, should we be having them find work and get health care through their employer or through the Obamacare exchange, or should we subsidize it through Medicaid and thus deprive the developmentally disabled and poor people who may have Medicaid but can't actually get access to health care? That's what's actually going on in the state. You have 25%, 20 to 25%, I think it is 20%, 1 out of 4 actually, people in Illinois right now are on Medicaid. And what's happening is you're having a squeezing problem where the poorest, most vulnerable are not actually getting access to health care.
What income level?
Either of you want to take that?
The first part we would do is we're going to roll back the eligibility for able-bodied single with no children.
So that they no longer have any, or where are you at? What income?
When you say roll back, you
Like
can
completely,
eliminate.
if you're a single person, no Medicaid.
Is that what you mean?
If you're, we would have,
Single adult, you don't get
the state's position would be to roll back the expansion of Medicaid to adults without children. But there are other pieces.
Yes. Okay, but let me address that, though. You're asking a question. You have to give people a chance to fully answer the question. Adult, able-bodied, single. 600,000 were put on Medicaid because of Obamacare expansion. Something north of 13 states, I forget the exact number now, never did that. how did those same people get health insurance in those states? The way those people got health insurance in those states is they either found employment that provided health insurance, or they bought health insurance through the individual market. This has worked. This has worked very successfully elsewhere, and many states have solved this problem. If you look at the states that didn't expand Obamacare Medicaid enrollment, they've solved the problem of the uninsured very effectively, and we should take a look at that.
It's just a fact that your plan starts by eliminating these 600,000 people.
And that's actually something that we couldn't afford back then, and we knew it. They had estimated back when they did the Medicaid expansion in 2013 that it was only going to be about 25,000 people on that Medicaid expansion. Instead, it's nearly 650,000 people that have taken up. Now, here's the truth. We also need the Medicaid block grant coming in from the states, because you have, I'll give you just one small example. You've got the Dental Society of Chicago that runs a number of free dental clinics around the suburbs and here. Now, they don't actually ask about your income level at all. In fact, if you were a single able-bodied person, you would get treated there, no problem. Now, they cannot receive any Medicaid reimbursement at all because of the Medicaid rules and the way that they're designed. If we had a block grant, we could actually help provide at least material support to those clinics and maybe expand that. But right now, we expect everything to come out of the volunteers that are there, which are doctors, and they're willing to do this. Dentists want to do this. They run really, really high-quality, good clinics. In fact, the clinic in Wheaton is right next door to the endodontists that I see. So these are really wonderful places where people are treated with respect, given the care they needed, and we can't give them any state-level support, even though they're treating the most needy among us, because of the Medicaid rules that come down from the government. If we get a block grant from that, guess what? We can innovate in many other ways to deliver care, and that's what we need to do.
What effect would this plan have on eligibility levels for people who have children? Not we talked about the single adults. What about people with kids?
We're not changing that at all. One of the things we eventually want to implement as part of this is medical savings accounts that would give the poor and the elderly an account through which they could buy insurance on their own, where they would control the insurance, that they would not have to be subject to the poor care that you get through Medicaid. You know, I understand the skepticism, but what we should be skeptical about is the way we're delivering care to the poorest among us right now. We're doing a lousy job. People are literally dying because they can't get access to care in this state.
Can you identify which states you think did a better job of handling the Medicaid expansion?
I would have to go back and look. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Either of you?
We could get that information to you.
And there aren't a lot of these in other states, these single people without health care, just literally through at least Medicaid, okay, just going without health care period, and then that ends up costing the state in the long run.
You have all kinds of impacts up and down. If you would like, we'll follow up with that. I don't have that in front of me right now.
Can I ask a question to Representative Ives and Representative Skillicorn? Have you taken this, I assume you have had some understanding of this prior to today, so you're talking $7 billion in savings, much of which maybe 40% or so is pensions. Have you taken this to your leader in the House, Durkin, to Senator Radonio, and said, well, why don't you negotiate this with, especially on the pension side, because people are skeptical that the proposal in their compromise would save even $1 billion, even $500 million. Have you taken any of this and said, why don't you go with this if you want to negotiate something with Senate President Cullerton? And if you did that, what was the response?
So we have not. This has been an embargoed plan of the Illinois Policy Institute. So as it stands as a comprehensive plan, we have not taken this because it's never been public until this morning. However, the interesting thing is that the elements in this plan are not new again. So you could go to the Illinois Municipal League, you could go to the two-page mayors and managers, you could go to individual mayors around the state. They have argued and advocated for many of these reform measures already, not to mention a number of the bills that are in this plan, a number of the proposals in this plan, again, have already been introduced in bill format down in Springfield. So taken as a whole, they're aware of these solutions. They're aware of this mix of proposals. They've just never put it together. And again, this was an embargoed comprehensive plan for 2018. We're rolling it out today. We're rolling it out today because we need a new direction, a new path in Illinois, and this is what taxpayers expect. If you sat at the kitchen table and explained this, in comparison to what the Senate proposal is, to that mom who's, you know, just trying to make it through the day, or that four-person family where the dad's working his tail off and maybe has a second job, and they know that they're funding the Medicare for an able-bodied single adult who doesn't want to get a job. I'll tell you what, they're all in on this plan, sir, all in.
Could you say, so you have 49, I think, colleagues in the State House. If now you can take this, now it's public, do you plan to take it to your caucus, and how many of those 49 do you think would go with you to the governor and say, hey, this is where we should go? How many of the 22 state Republican senators would say, hey, this is where we should go to the governor? I'm just trying to get an idea of the real political stuff here.
I think, look, we've had a lot of private conversations with representatives on the Senate and the House side. As Representative Ives have said, most of this has been discussed or implemented or put into legislation in some form or fashion. I think if there's a little bit of leadership, that there'll be greater take-up, and we're at the beginning of the process. I think you'll find the sponsors will emerge, and we'll see more and more people coming out publicly and supporting some or all of the proposal.
General rule of democracy is about majority rules. Donald Trump got a majority electoral vote. He's the president. Why should fiscal matters, tax hikes, require a 2/3 vote?
Well, for the same reason you have a 2/3 requirement in any number of parts of a democracy. A democracy does not always mean majority rules. A democracy sometimes means supermajority rules, whether you want to talk about a filibuster in the U.S. Senate for Supreme Court nominations, or whether you want to talk about a...
Why should there be a supermajority for taxes?
I'll answer that, but I want to first establish the appropriate principle that it is not always a simple majority, Greg. It is often a supermajority depending on what it is. And taking people's money for their labor is one of the most sacred acts government does, is taking money from an individual working for their family and putting it in for the common good of government. And unfortunately, political actors are often, the ability of citizens to hold politicians accountable is delayed and diffused. It is very hard for most people living their lives, raising their families, working in their business, to pay deep attention to what every single legislator, township supervisor, village board member is doing. So you want to put a barrier in front of those people taking money and make it harder and make them access the public for attention and approval, and I think that's why 2/3 is important.
Is money more sacred than providing services that arguably are something?
Yes, because there would be no services if you don't first take the money. Therefore, it's more sacred.
I'm confused here. There's the property tax savings that you're estimating, $3.4 billion. That comes from enacting a 5-year property tax freeze, and then also stopping the state paying the state's portion into pensions for higher ed and K through 12 teacher pensions. So if the state stops paying its portion in, and local property taxes are frozen, how do those pension costs get paid?
Michael will get you the detail, but let me give you a big picture first. On the one hand, we say that the subsidies from the state should stop supporting local government. Local government should be accountable for its own spending and accountable to its own voters. So that's the stopping of the subsidies that you're talking about. But in return, we offer a whole selection of local government reforms that the savings from that will more than offset what you lose from the state government.
Sure. So what we're looking at ultimately is a choice. We have a description coming out from Moody's, which is essentially the state might be in a death spiral. That's what their language is saying. What that means is you can continue raising taxes on a population that's fleeing, and you're just going to defeat yourself. So this is an outcome that we've warned about for a long time. It's starting to play out. We don't want this to happen. So the $3.4 billion, this is money that the state would keep. And then the offsets to that would be you would allow changes to collective bargaining. Local payroll is about $30 billion across the state for local governments. So the local governments could get savings. They could align the cost for payroll with what their taxpayers could actually afford, which is where we need to be across the state. There are other items, prevailing wage, workers' compensation, consolidations that we've worked out. We've estimated hundreds of millions in savings for each of these items, and other groups have estimated similar savings. But what we're looking is the state would be keeping some of that money to keep the state's books, but then would give it the locals the power to change things that they need to change in order to keep their costs under control. Yeah,
That's
a lot of other items.
one part of it. But competitive bidding, public-private partnerships, the Village of Glenview, Village of Grays Lake, these have been very innovative communities. They're consolidating their 911 activities, for example, saving money by doing that. The Village of Glenview put out competitive bidding for their IT services, saved $400,000 a year. They did competitive bidding on their snow plowing. They put some of that into a private contractor, saved a lot of money. There's
municipalities that are in support of the idea of losing the state's contribution to their pension costs?
every single state, every single political actor at the local level will want to hold on to every penny they can, and it won't be. And it won't be until the public demands these reforms that we really see the political will. I think what's really interesting about this entire conversation is the casting of the actors. There's three groups of people who benefit from taxpayer dollars. The government itself and the people who work for government, who are doing great. The poor and disadvantaged and other people who get benefits from government, including us who drive on roads and send our kids to school and all the rest of it, but especially people that are getting health care services for the poor, Medicaid services and all the rest of it. They're not doing so well. We're not delivering very good services to the most vulnerable citizens in this state. They're in fact at the back of the line, while the government and people who work for government at the front of the line. And of course the third group is the taxpayers themselves, where the money all starts out, and the first two don't get a dime unless you first take it from the taxpayer. They have been voting with their feet for years, 3 years in a row of net out-migration negative, because they don't think the deal is fair. So I appreciate the skepticism, and you should always be skeptical, but we should be very skeptical of the status quo that is failing. And we have to pick. We can't pay for everything. Do we say, okay, we're going to ask able-bodied single people to please go find that job that will get you the health insurance, or perhaps go to the exchange and get a health insurance and get a bronze plan, versus help somebody who is most destitute.
We're going to close the press conference after John's remarks here. Melanie in the back can take your card, and we're happy to answer any other questions you have. But thank you all for coming so much.
We have some more questions. Are you cutting it off?
Yes, we're cutting it
Can I
off.
just ask one thing on fiscal?
I'll come up and talk to you individually.
On fiscal 2017, because I think the Cullerton-Radonio proposal relates to the last half fiscal year 2017, the grand bargain, the compromise. Do you have any thoughts, John, on what you'd recommend about the last half year of fiscal 2017? Could you take what you have here?
Everything, I'll answer that briefly. Everything we're proposing for fiscal 2018 could be implemented in fiscal 2017 and have an immediate impact and begin to ease the pain.